In 62 AD, there was a man chained to a Roman guard who wrote a letter that, honestly, it completely breaks the mathematical spreadsheet of human success.
It really does.
He basically said that losing absolutely everything like his freedom, his comfort, and even his own life was pure, unadulterated profit. Welcome to Reformed Thinking.
Glad to be here.
Today we're taking a deep dive into two really intense theological texts. One is the telescope of affliction, and the other is the unwasted life.
Right.
And we're going to use these texts to answer, well, probably the most urgent human question out there.
Which is what actually makes a life valuable versus totally wasted.
Precisely. And we're grounding this whole analysis in the Apostle Paul's letter to the Philippians.
Yeah.
Specifically chapter 1, verses 20 through 26.
Yeah, it's a massive text.
It is. Now, I'm going into this with a lot of curiosity because we're looking at a subject that our modern society spends, what, billions of dollars actively avoiding?
For easily billions.
Right. Like, we hide from mortality, we medicate our pain, we just pretend physical decline isn't going to happen to us. But I want to set the tone right out of the gate here. This is not some morbid, depressing chat about the end of life.
No, not at all.
The sources we're looking at present this really exhilarating, God-centered framework for true joy, like unshakable joy. It flips our standard definitions of winning and losing entirely upside down.
It does. And to set the baseline for you, our listener, we're looking at these texts through a distinctly Protestant Reformed lens.
Which means what, practically?
Well, it means we are operating from the premise of God's absolute sovereignty over all circumstances. We aren't looking at a framework where God is just, sitting passively in heaven, reacting to human choices.
Or just crossing his fingers, hoping things work out.
Right, yeah. We are analyzing a worldview that recognizes God decrees and actively governs every single molecule in the universe. And yes, that includes every single trial, sickness, and hardship a person faces.
Which is a heavy concept.
It is heavy. The stakes here are astronomical because this perspective directly challenges the core assumptions of modern existence. So before we get into the mechanics of Paul's letter, you really need to evaluate your own baseline assumptions.
Yeah, listener, think about what you functionally consider a successful life.
Is it getting a clean bill of health from the doctor? Is it having enough financial security to survive a market crash?
Or maybe just a quiet, comfortable retirement without any major drama.
Exactly. Keep those answers in your head, because over the course of this deep dive, the texts are going to take those specific definitions of success and dismantle them completely.
And that dismantling starts with a pretty sharp critique of something the sources call moralistic therapeutic deism.
Yeah, TD.
Right. Sociologist Christian Smith coined that term. And the texts use it to diagnose the primary religion of our modern culture, which unfortunately heavily infects Western consumer Christianity.
It really does. It's everywhere.
We've basically turned God into a cosmic therapist.
That is a spot-on diagnosis of the modern condition. I mean, the pragmatic, seeker-sensitive model of modern religion operates on the premise that the highest good is human happiness.
Right.
It promises this sanitized, pain-free existence where the ultimate goal is just self-actualization.
Like God is a life coach.
Yeah, a life coach who exists, God is no longer presented as the transcendent Lord of the cosmos who demands absolute allegiance. Instead, his primary job description, according to this modern illusion anyway, is to eliminate your obstacles and ensure your emotional well-being.
It's a system designed to make you feel good about yourself while asking for zero sacrifice.
Zero.
It's an anthropocentric delusion. It puts the human being right at the dead center of the universe. And the texts point out that the human heart has been structurally wired for this exact brand of self-preservation ever since the fall in Eden.
We just have this innate drive to build fortresses around ourselves.
All right, to keep the pain out. We buy the right insurance, we eat, organic foods, we live in the right neighborhoods, all to build a life insulated from suffering.
But the biblical summons in these sources calls us to something radically different.
The Calvary Road.
Yes, and you can't walk the Calvary Road without taking up a cross.
Which creates a massive historical disconnect for us today. I mean, when Jesus looked at his disciples and said, "Take up your cross and follow me," those first century guys would have shuddered.
The psychological horror of that statement was palpable to them.
But to us, it just sounds like a cute metaphor. Like, oh, I have a difficult boss, that's my cross to bear. Or dealing with traffic.
Yeah, a minor inconvenience.
Think about how bizarre our modern relationship with the cross actually is. We took a brutal, state-sponsored instrument of agonizing torture, literally a device engineered by the Roman Empire to inflict maximum public shame and asphyxiation.
Physical agony.
Right. And we turn it into a harmless piece of decorative jewelry. We cast it in gold, we polish it up, we wear it around our necks.
We hang it as art in our living rooms.
Exactly. We completely sanitize the sheer horror of what that wood actually represented.
And by sanitizing the cross, we inherently sanitize the Christian life. The sources make this argument that an existence entirely devoted to the avoidance of hardship is an existence wasted on bubbles destined to burst.
Bubbles destined to burst.
Wow. If your main objective is to build a comfortable bubble of health and wealth, the weight of eternity is going to crush that bubble instantly.
So what's the alternative then?
The texts make a striking claim here. They say true magnification of Christ shines the absolute brightest when believers are systematically stripped of those temporal gifts.
Like when their health fails.
When health fails, when the bank account drains, when the reputation is ruined, yet they remain entirely satisfied in Him. It proves to the watching world that Christ is better than the sum total of all earthly comforts.
Okay, if that's the standard, then I am completely unequipped for it.
Let's be real. We all feel that way at first.
Because my instinct is to preserve my bubble at all costs. Why didn't the early Christians just run from this? Like, to understand how Paul could view suffering through this radical lens, we have to leave our comfortable air-conditioned reality and step directly into the historical pressure cooker he was in.
The setting is so critical here. The year is somewhere between AD 60 and 62. The Apostle Paul is not sitting in some serene, quiet study surrounded by leather-bound books.
Far from it.
He is under house arrest in Rome, bound continuously by an iron chain to a member of the Imperial Praetorian Guard.
And these weren't just random security guards.
No, these were the elite bodyguards of the emperor himself. Paul is facing a trial before Nero, who was known for his extreme volatility and cruelty.
To put it mildly.
Right. The very real, highly probable outcome of this trial is a brutal execution. Every time Paul moves his hand to write a letter, he hears the clinking of the iron chain, tying him to the absolute weight of the Roman state.
And he's writing this letter to the church in Philippi. Now, Philippi wasn't just a random dot on a map. It was a Roman colony, a colonia.
Which gave it a very specific status.
Yeah, it possessed the Aes Italicum, meaning it held the same legal status as land in Italy itself. It was heavily populated by retired Roman military veterans who were given land there after their service.
So the whole vibe of the city was very pro-Rome.
Totally. The entire civic and economic life of that city was centered squarely on the imperial cult. To buy goods in the marketplace, to sell your trade, to maintain social peace, you were legally and culturally expected to declare Kaiser Kyrios, Caesar is Lord.
Because the emperor was viewed as the supreme savior of the world, the sole guarantor of the Pax Romana, the Roman peace.
So when the Christian gospel arrives in Philippi and declares Isis Kyrios, Jesus is Lord, that's not perceived as a private, internal religious preference, is it?
Not at all. To the Roman mind, religion and statecraft were indistinguishable. Declaring a crucified Jewish carpenter from Galilee as the sovereign ruler of the kings of the earth was sheer subversive danger.
So it was treason.
Basically, yeah. It marked you as a social outcast, an economic liability, and a political rebel.
And to the Roman political machine, a man like Paul, chained to a guard, was pathetic. He was just a failed rebel whose so-called lord couldn't even keep him out of prison. He had zero legal rights, no public dignity, no political standing.
This conflict between the totalitarian demands of the state and the sovereign, exclusive claims of Christ, it's a recurring pattern throughout human history. The sources actually draw a direct parallel here to the life of Dietrich Bonhoeffer in Nazi Germany.
Oh, that's a fascinating connection.
It's very relevant. During the rise of the Third Reich, the visible, institutional German church largely capitulated to Adolf Hitler's ideology. They allowed the state to dictate their doctrine because they prioritized self-preservation and institutional survival over theological fidelity.
They wanted to keep their buildings, they wanted to keep their status, so they just compromised the message.
Precisely. But Bonhoeffer recognized the insidious nature of this compromise. He helped lead the Confessing Church, which was a movement that rejected the state's interference. And he established an underground seminary at Finkenwald.
He was deliberately training pastors for a ministry that he knew would probably get them arrested by the Gestapo.
Exactly. In his 1937 work, he heavily criticized the concept of cheap grace, which is the idea that you can have the forgiveness of Christ without the obedience of the cross.
Which sounds a lot like that MTD we talked about earlier.
It's the same root issue. He famously wrote, "When Christ calls a man, he bids him come and die. And Bonhoeffer lived that out literally. He was arrested, imprisoned, and eventually executed by hanging at the Flossenburg concentration camp in April 1945.
Just days before the camp was liberated.
Yeah,
Right?
literally days. But the texts use Bonhoeffer to illustrate that his death was not a tragic failure of his ministry. It was the ultimate witness that exposed the utter moral bankruptcy of the totalitarian state.
Okay, wait, I need to stop you there. Because when I hear about Paul facing Nero or Bonhoeffer facing the Gestapo, this massive question comes up for me. If following Christ guarantees this kind of violent collision with hostile empires, and potentially guarantees your own execution, how did the early church not just collapse from sheer terror?
It's a logical question.
Right, because self-preservation is the strongest biological instinct the human body possesses. If someone threatens your life, your adrenaline spikes, your heart races, and every fiber of your being screams at you to run away. Why didn't they all just run for the hills and practice their faith in secret?
Well, that is the exact question that texts seek to answer. The reason they didn't run is that they did not operate with our modern definitions of victory and defeat.
Or our definitions of honor and shame.
Exactly. To understand how they stood firm against the most powerful empires in human history, we have to look at the internal psychological mechanics of Paul's mind. He completely re-engineered the definitions of shame and glory.
And he spells out the mechanics of this in Philippians 1:20. Let's look at the rigorous exegesis the sources provide for this verse, because the Greek language here is incredibly vivid.
It really is.
Paul uses a compound Greek noun, apokeridokia. I love breaking this word down.
Yeah, go for it.
It comes from three distinct parts. The first is aboon, meaning away from.
Okay.
The second is kara, meaning the head. And the third is dokin, meaning to watch or to look.
It creates a highly specific physical image in the mind of the reader.
It does. It paints the picture of someone physically straining their neck forward, turning their head away from all distracting objects, and watching with intense, undivided, tiptoe expectancy.
Tiptoe expectancy, that's a great way to phrase it.
Think about the reality of his situation. Paul is physically chained to a hostile guard. He's surrounded by the overwhelming military might of Rome. But his psychological head is turned completely away from his prison walls.
He is ignoring the legal maneuvers of his impending trial.
Yeah, his gaze is fixed entirely on the horizon of Christ's vindication.
And he pairs that intense, focused expectancy with the concept of parrhesia.
Which translates to what?
Boldness, or uninhibited, courageous speech. Historically, parrhesia referred to the democratic right of free speech in public assemblies, especially the right of a citizen to speak absolute truth to tyrannical authority without fear of reprisal.
So Paul isn't asking God for a quiet, private faith so he can survive under the radar.
No, he desires public, unashamed, highly visible proclamation of the gospel.
And this totally flips the Greco-Roman honor and shame culture on its head. In their society, being chained up by the state was the pinnacle of shame.
It meant you were a loser.
It meant you had been conquered. But Paul says, no, true shame is not physical suffering. True shame is not being mocked, beaten, ostracized, or even executed by Nero's executioners.
So what is true shame to Paul?
True shame is the failure to make much of Christ. If you were to shrink back in cowardice, if you were to water down his message to save his own skin and secure his release, that would be the ultimate shame.
This redefinition leads to the core action he desires above all else. Paul states that his singular expectation is that Christ will be magnified in his body, whether by life or by death. The specific verb used there is megalunthesetai, which is the passive voice of the verb to be magnified.
The distinction of the passive voice is crucial here. The sources make a really brilliant distinction between a microscope and a telescope.
I love this analogy.
It's so helpful. It's not about projection. A microscope takes something minuscule, something you can't even see with the naked eye, and it projects it, blowing it up so it looks huge.
But Christ is not a tiny, insignificant bug that we need to artificially inflate.
He is already massive. He is infinite.
Precisely. The analogy of the telescope fits because a telescope does not alter the actual size of the object it is observing. Think about a massive star burning at 1 billion degrees, millions of light years away.
To our naked, weak eyes, it just looks like a tiny, insignificant prick of light in the night sky.
Right. The telescope does not make the star bigger. It simply clarifies the massive reality of that star to an eye that cannot comprehend its true magnitude.
So our physical bodies act as that clarification device. We are the telescopes making his massive, distant-seeming majesty appear clear and huge to a world that is completely blind to him.
And physical affliction actually adjusts the lens of that telescope to bring the image into sharper focus.
How so?
The texts argue this point heavily. When the secular world observes a believer exhibiting genuine, unshakable joy in the total absence of earthly security.
Like when the cancer diagnosis is terminal.
Yes. When the bank account is seized, when political freedom is revoked and life itself is on the line, the magnification of the Savior is absolute.
Because the mechanism of suffering removes all other potential sources of happiness.
Spot on. It proves mathematically to the observer that Christ alone is more satisfying than the sum total of all temporal blessings combined.
But this telescopic display requires a theological calculus that defies all earthly logic. Our math says that adding days to your life is a gain, and subtracting days is a loss.
That's the normal human equation.
But Paul takes that math and shreds it in a single verbalist sentence in Philippians 1:21.
To me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain.
In the original Greek, the phrasing is incredibly compressed and punchy. It reads literally, to me, to live, Christ, to die, gain.
The language he uses for the word gain is kerdos, which is strict, uncompromising financial ledger language.
Like accounting terminology.
Exactly. It means a literal profit, an economic advantage, a positive return on investment.
I have to admit, when you really look at the raw mechanics of this equation, it is an absolute scandal.
How do you mean?
Well, death subtracts every single comfort you have ever known. It dissolves every earthly relationship you cherish. It ends your career, your hobbies, and even your earthly ministry and usefulness to the church. It strips you of everything material. How can a complete traumatic loss of everything you know be mathematically categorized as a positive profit?
To understand the mechanics of the scandal, we have to examine the theological grounding provided in the sources, specifically relying on the framework articulated in the Westminster Confession.
Okay, let's unpack that.
This entire concept hinges on understanding Christ as the mediator of the covenant of grace, and specifically the dual nature of his obedience.
Let's break down the mechanics of that dual obedience, because it changes how a person physically processes the fear of death.
Within this reformed framework, Christ achieves complete redemption through two distinct but inseparable aspects of his work. First, we have his active obedience.
Meaning his life on earth.
Right. It means that during his earthly life, he lived a perfect, sinless existence, completely and flawlessly fulfilling all the righteous requirements of the moral law on behalf of his people. He achieved the perfect record of righteousness that we could never achieve.
Okay, and the second aspect?
Second, we have his passive obedience. This refers specifically to his willing submission to suffering and his death on the cross, where he absorbed the full, unmitigated wrath of God to satisfy divine justice for the sins of his people.
So the active obedience provides the perfect record we need, and the passive obedience pays the massive debt we owe.
You've got it.
He perfectly obeyed where we failed, and he took the exact punishment we deserved.
Accurately stated. Now think about how this alters the psychology of facing death. We naturally fear death because inherently the human conscience knows there is a holy judgment attached to it.
Death is the penalty for sin.
Yes. But because of this dual obedience, the penal curse of death is completely shattered for the believer. The wrath of the judge has already been entirely absorbed by the substitute.
Which fundamentally changes what death is.
Therefore, death is structurally and legally redefined. It is no longer a punishment. It has been defeated, stripped of its sting, and it is now entirely conscripted.
Conscripted, like a drafted soldier.
Exactly. It is a defeated worker whose only remaining job is to act as a chauffeur, forcing the soul out of a broken world and into the unfiltered, immediate presence of the Savior.
Wow.
Death can take away your health, your money, and your breathing, but it cannot take Christ away. In fact, it's the very vehicle that brings you into his direct presence. That is how the loss of everything becomes pure profit.
Okay, wait, I have a major objection here.
Let's hear it.
Because this kind of rhetoric can be incredibly dangerous if misunderstood. If a believer listens to this framework and concludes, okay, the math is clear, earthly life is full of suffering, and death is pure, unadulterated profit. To die is gain. Doesn't that logically suggest we should hate the physical world?
I see where you're going.
Should we despise the creation God made? Because that sounds dangerously close to encouraging reckless martyrdom, or at the very least, a deep, depressive apathy toward living. If death is the ultimate profit, why not seek it out as fast as possible?
It is a totally valid concern, and historically, some ascetic movements have fallen into that exact trap. However, the text itself prevents us from arriving at that conclusion.
How does it do that?
Well, Paul did not hate the physical life God gave him. In fact, verses 22 through 24 reveal the tremendous, agonizing psychological tension within him. He is not apathetic. He is caught in a holy dilemma.
He explicitly says he is hard-pressed between the two options. The Greek verb used there is synekomai.
Synekoma, yes.
The imagery behind this word is fantastic. It literally means being hemmed in, held together, or compressed on both sides.
Like a vice grip.
Exactly. The picture the sources paint is of a traveler walking through a very narrow mountain pass. You have a towering, unscalable rock wall on your left and a towering, unscalable rock wall on your right.
You can't turn around. You can't go sideways.
You can only move in two directions, and the psychological pressure of the narrowing walls is immense.
On one side of this narrow pass is his intense desire to depart. The word Paul uses for depart is analysai, and it's loaded with rich, descriptive metaphors from the ancient world.
What kind of metaphors?
Well, it was used heavily in military contexts for the act of striking tents and breaking camp to march homeward.
Oh, that's beautiful.
It was also used in nautical contexts for the act of untying the mooring ropes of a ship to launch out from a shallow harbor into the deep water.
Like setting sail.
Right. And it was used in the Roman justice system for the act of releasing a prisoner from his chains.
So for Paul, who is literally chained to a Praetorian guard,
Death is breaking camp. It is untying the ship. It is the final release of the chains to go home.
and he pushes the limits of the Greek language to describe just how superior that departure is. He uses a double comparative.
Which is grammatically unusual.
Right. Literally translated, he says, departing to be with Christ is by far much more better. The grammar is intentionally redundant. He is stacking comparative words on top of each other because normal vocabulary fails to demonstrate his point.
Which is that the supremacy of being with Christ surpasses the absolute best moments of earthly existence.
In the same way, the burning surface of the sun surpasses the flicker of a cheap candle.
That's a solid way to put it. But here is where the argument pivots radically. Despite the unmatched, overwhelming appeal of that departure,
despite the by far much more better reality of entering paradise,
Paul does not choose the immediate exit. He arrives at a conclusion that completely redefines the entire purpose of taking another breath on this earth. Let's analyze verses 25 and 26.
He decides that staying in the flesh, remaining in his physical body, is more necessary.
Right.
But the mechanism of why it is more necessary is what shatters our modern worldview. He doesn't say, I need to stay so I can finally visit Spain like I always planned.
No personal bucket list.
He doesn't say, I need to stay so I can secure my financial legacy or write a few more best-selling scrolls. He concludes that his continued physical existence is necessary specifically for the Philippians' progress and joy in the faith.
This conclusion utterly demolishes the concept of self-centered individualism. The sources make it clear earthly existence is vindicated and made valuable only when it is spent as a cross-bearing sacrifice for the spiritual joy of the local congregation.
Your life is not your own.
It isn't.
Let me draw an analogy here because this is so completely alien to how we operate today. Think about modern consumer-driven church culture.
Oh man, let's hear it.
So many people walk into a church service acting exactly like a restaurant critic walking into a new dining establishment.
That is so true.
They sit in the pew with a mental clipboard, evaluating the experience based entirely on their personal preferences. How was the music? Was the sermon too long? Did the lighting match my mood? Did the children's ministry cater to my specific needs?
It is entirely inward-facing, evaluating the community solely on what it provides to the individual.
Right. If the restaurant doesn't serve exactly what they want, they leave a bad review and find a new restaurant.
But Paul's vision of the church is not a restaurant. It is a battleground of love.
A battleground. I like that.
In the middle of a war zone, a soldier does not walk around reviewing the catering or complaining about the thread count of their uniform. A true soldier willingly expends their own limited rations, their own physical energy, and their own safety to keep their fellow soldiers alive, fighting, and joyful.
Paul is essentially saying to the Philippians, I will voluntarily delay my own entrance into eternal paradise. I will accept more beatings, more shipwrecks, and more chains if my continued sweating and bleeding on this earth helps your faith grow stronger.
That realization changes the entire calculation of daily life. And notice the dual focus of his labor for them, their progress and joy.
Progress and joy. Why those two specifically?
The sources analyze the intricate relationship between theological doctrine and emotional joy here. Progress in doctrine without joy degrades rapidly into cold, legalistic duty.
It becomes rigid, lifeless, and harsh.
Conversely, joy without sound doctrine is mere shallow enthusiasm. It is an emotional high that will completely evaporate the moment a real crisis hits.
True, resilient faith requires both advancing together.
Solid doctrine and deep joy are the twin engines of Christian perseverance. You cannot survive the Calvary Road with only one engine running.
So, how do we practically apply this first-century apostolic blueprint to our lives today? I mean, most of us listening to this are not facing an executioner like Nero, and we are not hiding from the Gestapo like Bonhoeffer.
True.
We are dealing with ordinary daily struggles, paying mortgages, raising kids, dealing with difficult coworkers. How does a theology forged in an iron chain speak to a modern suburban life?
The sources extract several rigorous, highly practical applications for this. First and foremost, there must be an active, uncompromising rejection of the health, wealth, and prosperity gospel in all its forms.
Which is incredibly rampant today. It's often disguised as positive thinking or manifesting your destiny.
It is deeply entrenched. The texts identify the prosperity gospel not just as a minor theological error, but as a soul-destroying idol and a direct, hostile inversion of biblical truth.
Hostile inversion.
Yes. If your functional theology tells you that God's primary goal is to secure your physical comfort, elevate your career, and guarantee your financial success, you have entirely missed the meaning of the cross.
You're back to the cosmic therapist.
Exactly. In fact, the sources argue that sometimes the greatest, most loving mercy God can provide a believer is a severe mercy.
A severe mercy. That sounds like an oxymoron. Let's break down the mechanics of that.
Sure.
We are talking about the onset of aging, chronic sickness, the betrayal of a close friend, the sudden loss of a career. How can the devastation of those events possibly be categorized as a mercy?
Because physical and emotional pain shatters the dangerous illusion of self-reliance. When you are healthy and wealthy, it is very easy to believe you are the master of your own fate.
Oh, 100%.
A severe mercy strips away those false supports. It forces a believer to realize they have absolutely nothing left but God. The Apostle Paul himself details this exact psychological process in 2 Corinthians 1:9.
What does he say there?
He states that they received the sentence of death specifically to make them rely not on themselves, but on the God who raises the dead.
Wow.
To accept a severe mercy, we have to apply the Reformed view of providence.
Meaning God holds absolute meticulous sovereignty over the suffering itself. Satan, or the forces of nature, cannot touch a single hair on a believer's head without the explicit decretive permission of the sovereign God.
Exactly. And this is where the texts bring in the pastoral wisdom of John Bunyan.
John Bunyan, the guy who wrote The Pilgrim's Progress.
Yes, he spent 12 years living in a squalid, freezing prison cell in Bedford simply because he refused to stop preaching the gospel outside the sanctioned state church.
12 years.
He had a brilliant, deeply nuanced view on how a Christian should face danger and persecution. He taught that there is no strict legalistic rule that applies to every single scenario.
Like, you don't always have to be the martyr.
Right. If a door of escape opens, it is entirely acceptable to flee danger, preserve your life, and continue your ministry elsewhere.
But what if there's no door?
If that door is firmly closed by providence and you are captured, or the disease takes hold, the believer must rest. You can laugh at the threat, he says, knowing the scales of your fate remain entirely in God's hands, not the hands of your enemies or your illness.
Which brings us to how we prepare for those moments when the door closes. The sources point to the biblical concept of dying daily, as mentioned in 1 Corinthians 15:31.
Dying daily, that's a powerful practice.
We do not just sit around comfortably, waiting for the final moment of physical death to suddenly test our faith. We practice. It is a form of tactical exposure therapy for the soul.
How do you do that practically?
We deliberately practice dying by saying no to small, secret sins that promise immediate gratification. We practice dying by releasing our justified desire for revenge when someone genuinely wrongs us. We practice dying by intentionally giving away hoarded wealth instead of building bigger barns to secure our own future.
Every time we consciously choose the magnification of Christ over our own personal comfort, we are doing a rehearsal.
We are actively weakening our attachment to this world, training our spiritual muscles for the final, ultimate letting go at the moment of death.
That training is the crux of the entire matter. A life is fundamentally wasted when it fails to display the supreme worth and supremacy of Christ. regardless of how safe, how respectable, or how conventionally successful that life looks to the surrounding society.
It doesn't matter what the spreadsheet says.
Not at all. If you spend 80 years building a pristine, unblemished life, accumulating wealth, avoiding all controversy, and retiring in perfect health, but the massive reality of Christ is not magnified through you, the rigorous conclusion of these texts is that your life, in the grand calculus of eternity, was wasted.
I want to ask you, the listener, directly. Assess what you genuinely treasure most right now. And do not look at the answers you would give in a Bible study or what you sing on a Sunday morning.
Look at your functional, knee-jerk reactions.
What specific loss, what specific disappointment in your life makes you the angriest with God? If a sudden financial hit, a setback in your career trajectory, or a concerning change in your medical chart makes you furious with the Almighty, that anger is a flare going up in the dark.
It reveals your true idol.
It reveals exactly what you are structurally relying on for your happiness.
It is a painful diagnostic tool, but an absolutely essential one. The logic of Philippians is sequential. If we ever want to authentically declare at the end of our lives that to die is gain, we first must spend the entirety of our lives proving that to live is Christ.
You cannot have the profit of the departure if you have not embraced the sacrifice of the remaining. I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over long after this audio stops playing. If the moment of physical death is the final, ultimate exam of your faith, or the minor inconveniences, the daily frustrations, and the sudden illnesses we face right now actually open book quizzes.
That's a profound way to frame it.
Think about the mechanics of that. How you react tomorrow to a delayed flight, an unexpected financial bill, or a doctor's diagnosis might be the exact tactical rehearsal you need for the day you finally breathe your last.
You are practicing.
Every day you are practicing your response to loss. So the question is, are you practicing to declare to die is gain? Because when you try to calculate the math of a human life, the spreadsheet will remain broken until you enter Christ as the bottom line.